All right, ready to dive into the Daily Stoic.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Looks like you've been collecting quite the collection of excerpts from the book,
I have. I've got a whole bunch of them, philosophical insights and historical anecdotes.
and you want to go through it chapter by chapter.
Yeah, that's the plan. I think it'll be really interesting to see how it all connects.
It's fascinating how Stoicism, something from ancient times, can still feel so relevant.
It really is. And I think the Daily Stoic does a great job of bridging that gap, connecting those ancient teachings with modern day challenges.
It does, and it's all built around those three core disciplines of Stoicism, right?
Mm,
Perception, action, and will.
exactly. Those are kind of like our guideposts for this whole deep dive.
So why don't we start with that first chapter, the big three?
Perfect. This chapter lays the groundwork for pretty much everything else. It introduces those core Stoic principles we were just talking about.
And there's that quote from Marcus Aurelius, right? The one that really sets the tone.
Oh, yeah. The one about certainty of judgment, action for the common good, and a gratitude.
That's the one. I actually have it pulled up here. It says, all you need are these: certainty of judgment in the present moment, action for the common good in the present moment, and an attitude of gratitude in the present moment for anything that comes your way.
Powerful stuff. And it all boils down to focusing on what we can control, our judgments, our actions, and our attitudes.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in worrying about things that are completely outside of our control.
Definitely. Stoicism gives us a way to break free from that constant worry.
And that leads us right into the next chapter, control and clarity, which really dives into that idea of breaking free.
Especially when it comes to addiction, right?
Exactly. The book tackles some tough stuff there, things that I think a lot of us struggle with, like soda, complaining, or that never-ending internet rabbit hole.
Oh, tell me about it. And it hits hard with that line. Addiction is when we've lost the freedom to abstain.
Oof. It makes you think. Have you ever felt addicted to something? Even like a small thing?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like, you should be doing something else, but you just can't stop yourself.
And it's like our world is designed to make us addicted to things. Right?
Totally. Think about it. Our phones, the news, social media, it's all designed to keep us hooked.
It's like a constant battle for our attention.
It really is. And that's exactly what the next chapter, Don't Be Distracted, is all about.
Right. This chapter is so relevant to like everything we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
It talks about how external forces, especially the media, try to manipulate us.
Through outrage and anger, you mean?
Exactly. It's like they know that negativity gets clicks. Have you noticed how algorithms seem to just feed off of that?
All the time. It's scary how accurate they are at figuring out what will keep us engaged.
I know. And the book actually connects this to what Marcus Aurelius was saying about gossip and fear, like thousands of years ago.
So those distractions, they're nothing new. It's just the way they're delivered to us that has changed.
It's human nature to get pulled into drama, I guess.
It seems like it, but Stoicism gives us a way to step back from that, to, regain control over our attention.
Right. Instead of being sucked into the 24/7 news cycle,
Hmm.
or those endless social media feeds.
Right. We can actually choose what we focus on.
It's like how much more present could you be if you just like drastically reduced your media consumption?
I think the difference would be huge for our mental health, our relationships, for everything.
Totally. It's all about choosing to focus on what truly matters.
And speaking of what truly matters, let's move on to wealth doesn't solve internal problems.
I love this chapter. It really debunks that whole myth that money equals happiness.
It does, and it uses that famous anecdote about F. Scott Fitzgerald, right?
Oh, yeah. The one where he said, the rich are different from you and me.
Right. And Hemingway, quick back, yes, they have more money.
Classic Hemingway.
Yeah.
But there's a deeper message there, right?
Definitely. The book uses the story to show how external possessions can't fix internal issues. It's a lesson that Fitzgerald, unfortunately, learned the hard way.
I mean, we've all probably chased something external at some point, right?
I know I have. A new gadget, a promotion, even a relationship.
Hoping it would fix some internal void.
Exactly. But the book reminds us that true happiness has to come from within.
It does. It's like a wake-up call to reevaluate our priorities.
And that brings us to The Cheap Things Matter, which really challenges that whole idea that we need a lot of money to be happy.
Right. It's like if the things that mattered most to you were inexpensive, how would your life be different?
That's a great question. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. And the chapter gives us some great examples of millionaires who live really simply.
Like Warren Buffett, right. Still living in the same modest house he bought decades ago.
Exactly. Or John Urschel, who walked away from a lucrative NFL career.
To pursue mathematics.
Yeah. It's like they prioritized what truly mattered to them. And it wasn't about money or status.
Yeah. It's about aligning our actions with what brings us fulfillment, regardless of the price tag.
Which is a great segue into the next chapter, 3 areas of training.
Ah, yes. The chapter that gives us a framework for putting all of this into practice.
Exactly. It outlines Epictetus's 3 areas of training, which are like a roadmap for developing self-awareness.
He breaks it down into desiring good and avoiding bad, examining our motivations for actions, and controlling our assent to impressions.
So it's like a step-by-step guide for training our minds and our emotions to be more aligned with our values.
Exactly.
So the first area, desiring good and avoiding bad. What does that even mean?
Well, it's about being mindful of what we're drawn to. Are those desires leading us toward what's truly beneficial?
Right, right. It's easy to get caught up in chasing things that just, sound good in the moment.
Definitely. And then we have examining our motivations for actions. Why are we doing the things we do?
Are we acting out of habit, impulse,
Mm-hmm.
or, is there something deeper there?
Exactly. And finally, we have controlling our assent to impressions.
Ah, yes. The Stoic idea that we have a choice in how we respond to things.
Right. It's not about suppressing our emotions, but about choosing how we react.
I love that. So, imagine someone cuts you off in traffic.
Okay.
You could get angry and, let it ruin your day.
Right. That's the natural reaction for a lot of people.
Or you could choose to just take a deep breath.
And recognize that their actions are outside your control.
And just, move on. It's powerful stuff.
It really is. And it reminds me of the next chapter, Do Your Job, which is all about focusing on what you can control.
Yes. That chapter uses the example of Bill Belichick, right?
Yes, with his famous mantra, do your job.
No distractions, no worrying about things you can't influence. Just focus on what you can do.
And what's brilliant is that this applies to so much more than just football or even our jobs.
Right. We can use that do your job mindset in our relationships, in our personal growth,
Yeah.
even in our hobbies.
Exactly. It's about bringing our full attention and effort to whatever we're doing.
And that brings us to philosophy as medicine, which I think is such a brilliant concept.
I love this chapter too. It's like, instead of seeing philosophy as just an intellectual pursuit, it's about using it to actually heal ourselves.
Right. Seneca compares it to, seeking treatment for a physical ailment.
It's like we wouldn't hesitate to see a doctor if we were sick.
Of course not.
So why not apply that same logic to our mental and emotional well-being?
Instead of reaching for a quick fix or numbing our pain, we can turn to philosophy.
To develop resilience, wisdom, and inner peace.
And it's like physical health, right? It requires consistent effort.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey of self-discovery and growth.
I love that.
Me too.
And speaking of journeys, let's move on to don't seek out strife.
Ooh, this one's interesting. It seems to be advocating for avoiding conflict altogether.
Yeah. It's like choosing peace over war, which kind of goes against that whole idea that anger can be a motivator.
Right, that anger can be a powerful force for change.
Yeah, exactly. But Seneca argues that while anger might give us that temporary burst of energy,
it often leads to regret, strained relationships, and, just more suffering in the long run.
So true. Have you ever found that anger has actually led to positive outcomes in your life?
Honestly, I can think of way more times where it just clouded my judgment.
And led to decisions you regretted.
Exactly. It's like you might get a fleeting sense of satisfaction from anger, but is it worth the long-term cost?
The Stoics would say no. It's about recognizing the destructive potential of anger and choosing a more constructive path.
One that prioritizes inner peace and healthy relationships. And I think that leads us nicely to protect your peace of mind, which is all about safeguarding our inner world from external chaos.
This one's a biggie, especially in today's world where there's just constant noise and stimulation.
Right, it can be overwhelming. And the chapter highlights how crucial it is to guard our perceptions.
It actually uses a quote here. Keep constant guard over your perceptions, for it is no small thing you are protecting, but your respect, trustworthiness and steadiness, peace of mind, freedom from pain and fear. In a word, your freedom.
That's so good. It's like our perceptions are the gateway to our inner world.
Exactly. If we let in negativity and fear and all of that, it just colors everything.
Totally. But if we choose to focus on the good, the true, the beautiful,
then we create a more peaceful and fulfilling inner world.
Exactly.
But it goes beyond just think positive, right?
Oh, absolutely. The chapter gives us some real strategies for calming the mind, overcoming anxiety, and cultivating inner peace.
And one of those strategies is recognizing the futility of worrying about things that haven't happened yet.
Or might never happen.
Oh, that's a big one for me.
Yeah.
My mind loves to spiral into those what-if scenarios.
It's so easy to do. But as the Stoics remind us, we often create our own suffering by dwelling on those anxieties.
So true. What about you? What helps you stay grounded in the present moment?
Sometimes it's as simple as just like taking a deep breath and focusing on my senses. What I can see, hear, feel.
Yeah, that's a good one. Just bring your attention back to the here and now.
Exactly. And speaking of letting go of things we can't control, let's move on to want nothing invincibility, which is all about the power of contentment.
Oh, I love this one. It uses the example of Diogenes, right? Who said something about it being the privilege of the gods to want nothing.
And of godlike men to want little.
Right. Now, I'm not sure I'm ready to give up all my worldly possessions just yet.
Me neither. But there's definitely wisdom in detaching from those desires that are constantly pulling us outside ourselves.
Totally. It's like, are those desires truly serving us, or are they just keeping us on a hamster wheel of wanting more, more, more?
Exactly.
The chapter uses the example of Gatsby, right? All that wealth and those parties.
And still, he was chasing a dream that was ultimately out of reach.
It's a classic example of how attaching our happiness to external things can lead to suffering.
The Stoics would say that true freedom comes from aligning our will with what is.
Rather than constantly striving for what we think we want.
Exactly. So the question is, what attachments are holding us back from true freedom and contentment?
Ooh, that's a good one. What do we need to let go of to experience that inner peace that the Stoics talk about?
That's something we can all ponder. And on that note, I think we should move on to circumstances have no care for our feelings.
Okay, what's this one about?
This chapter feels like a short, sharp dose of reality. It's all about accepting that, the universe doesn't revolve around us.
Right. Life isn't always fair.
Exactly. And Marcus Aurelius reminds us of that. He says, you shouldn't give circumstances the power to rouse anger, for they don't care at all.
So true. It's like yelling at the rain for ruining your picnic.
Exactly. It's not going to change the weather.
Not at all. So this chapter is encouraging us to shift our focus.
From what we can't control to what we can.
Right. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me?
We can ask, what can I do about it?
Much more empowering. It's about taking responsibility for our own reactions.
And that leads perfectly into the next chapter, The Real Source of Harm, which is all about the Stoic idea that our perceptions shape our reality.
And they use another powerful quote from Marcus Aurelius for this one.
Oh, let me guess. Is it the one about harm not coming from the person who takes a swipe at you?
That's the one. It says, keep in mind that it isn't the one who has it in for you and takes a swipe that harms you, but rather the harm comes from your own belief about the abuse.
It's not the external event itself that causes us harm, but our interpretation of it.
Right. So two people could experience the same thing.
And have totally different emotional responses.
Depending on their own individual perceptions. That's pretty radical.
The Stoics believed we actually have the power to choose our response to impressions.
Rather than just, blindly reacting based on our emotions.
Exactly.
Which, let's be honest, is easier said than done.
Oh, yeah, especially when we're talking about strong emotions.
Like anger. Which brings us to the next chapter. The Smoke and Dust of Myth.
Ah, yes. The one that explores the fleeting nature of anger.
It uses that great analogy from Marcus Aurelius, where he compares anger and resentment to,
Smoke and dust, the stuff of simple myth trying to be legend.
Yes. Such a great image. It really captures that idea that anger can be this destructive force,
That ultimately fades away.
leaving very little of value behind.
So true.
So the chapter encourages us to consider the long-term consequences of holding on to anger and resentment.
Ask ourselves, are these emotions serving us, or are they just causing more suffering?
Right. Like we might get that initial rush of adrenaline, but in the long run, it's not sustainable.
And it can be so tempting to hold on to that anger, especially when we feel justified in our anger.
Totally.
But the Stoics would say, hey, you always have a choice.
You can choose a different path, one that leads to peace and well-being.
Exactly. And on that note of choosing a different path, I think we should move on to respond with kindness.
This one sounds good.
I love this chapter. It's all about responding to negativity with kindness,
Even when it's hard.
especially when it's hard.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It uses a quote from Marcus Aurelius, something like, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you.
Wow, that's a tall order.
It is. But the chapter argues that responding with kindness can have this really disarming effect.
It's like breaking the cycle of negativity.
Exactly. And there's that biblical analogy in there, too, about heaping burning coals on his head.
I've heard that one.
It suggests that, kindness can sometimes make the other person feel ashamed of their actions, and it could even lead to a change in their behavior.
It's like meeting negativity with something unexpected. It disrupts the whole pattern.
Exactly. And it's not about being a doormat or letting people walk all over you. It's about, choosing a response that promotes understanding and potentially even transformation.
It's a high bar, for sure.
It is, but the rewards can be huge.
Both for ourselves and for, the people around us.
Exactly. And that brings us to another challenging concept: cultivating indifference, where others grow passion.
Okay. I have to admit that title throws me off a bit. Indifference sounds kind of cold.
It does, but I promise it's not as harsh as it sounds.
Okay, good. I was getting worried for a second.
The Stoics weren't advocating for apathy or a lack of feeling. It's more about recognizing what's within our control and what isn't.
So it's about accepting that we can't control external events.
Like the weather, the economy, or other people's actions.
Right.
But we can choose how we respond to those events.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's like finding that balance between striving for what's good and accepting what is.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that acceptance doesn't mean giving up on our goals or anything.
Right.
It's about cultivating that inner peace and freedom that come from, aligning our will with the natural order of things.
Which brings us to another chapter that seems to encourage letting go. You can't always be getting what you want.
I love that chapter title. It plays on that classic Rolling Stones song.
Right. It makes me chuckle every time.
And it uses this really fun analogy of a child with their hands stuck in a cookie jar because they tried to grab too much.
Oh, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like my own desires and ambitions are trapping me.
It happens to the best of us. The chapter reminds us that to get what we truly need, we sometimes need to let go of certain things.
It's about prioritizing what truly matters and recognizing that wanting too much can actually prevent us from achieving anything.
Exactly. And that brings us to a super important theme: disintegration. This one's all about being a whole person, aligning our inner and outer worlds.
So it's like walking the walk, being the same person on the inside as we are on the outside.
Exactly. Epictetus says it way better than I can. He says, these things don't go together. You must be a unified human being, either good or bad. You must diligently work either on your own reasoning or on things out of your control. Stand with the philosopher or else with the mob.
Wow, that's pretty intense. But it makes sense, right?
Totally. It's a call to live authentically, to choose reasoned choice over the fleeting opinions of others.
Right. I was just thinking about how much pressure there is, especially on social media, to project a certain image. It can be exhausting.
Absolutely. The Stoics would say that chasing that external validation at the expense of our own integrity, well, that will just lead to inner conflict.
It's about recognizing that true freedom comes from living in alignment with our values, regardless of what other people might think.
Exactly.
Which is easier said than done, for sure.
Oh, definitely. But it's worth striving for, don't you think?
Absolutely. What do you think is the biggest challenge to living authentically?
That's a good question. For me, it's probably the constant bombardment of information and opinions online.
Oh, same. It's so easy to get swept up in that and lose sight of your own inner compass.
Exactly. And that's why the next chapter, Protect Your Mind, is so important.
Okay, tell me about this one.
This chapter emphasizes protecting our mental space from those influences that, just clutter our thinking.
Right. It's about being mindful of what we consume, not just in terms of food, but also information and entertainment.
Exactly. Are we feeding our minds things that uplift us and inspire us?
Or are we just, letting ourselves be bombarded with negativity and distractions?
And the chapter uses the examples of social media, television, even our own negative or judgmental thoughts.
It's like we need to be vigilant about what we're allowing in.
It really is.
It's like choosing healthy food for our minds instead of junk food.
I love that analogy. And just like we set boundaries with food, we also need to set boundaries with information.
It's about creating space for silence, for reflection, for those activities that nourish our souls.
Absolutely. And speaking of nourishing our souls, the next chapter is Choose Your Company Wisely.
Okay, this one seems pretty self-explanatory.
It is, but I think it's worth emphasizing, especially in today's world.
Yeah, especially when we're all so interconnected online, it can be hard to know who to trust, who to let in.
Exactly. The chapter draws on the wisdom of Musonius Rufus, who said, "Choose as your friends those who are upright in their lives."
I like that. It's about surrounding ourselves with people who lift us up and inspire us.
Right. And it goes on to quote Theognis of Megara, who said, "Avoid the company of wicked men." It's not about being judgmental or exclusive. It's about recognizing that we tend to, adopt the habits and behaviors of those we spend the most time with.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly.
So the chapter is encouraging us to really evaluate our relationships.
Ask ourselves, are these people supporting my growth? Are they encouraging me to be my best self?
Ooh, that's a good question. And it can be a tough one to face, honestly, especially if we realize that some of our closest relationships might not be serving us in the best way.
It's about being honest with ourselves and making adjustments as needed. Sometimes that means setting boundaries.
Or even limiting our exposure to certain individuals, even if we care about them. Right. It's about prioritizing our own well-being and recognizing that we do have the power to choose who we allow into our inner circle.
Absolutely. And it's not about cutting people out of our lives completely. It's about, being mindful of the energy we exchange with others.
And choosing to invest in relationships that are mutually beneficial.
Exactly. So moving on, how about we tackle no one does wrong willingly? This one presents a concept that I think might be difficult to swallow, especially if you've been hurt by someone.
I'm curious. Tell me more about this one.
Okay, so this chapter, it draws on Socrates, who believed that nobody does wrong willingly. In other words, people don't intentionally choose to do wrong.
They're acting from a place of misunderstanding or flawed reasoning.
Exactly.
So it's like they might be trying to do the right thing, but they're just not seeing things clearly.
Right. Now, I know this can be hard to accept, especially if someone's actions have really hurt you, but it offers a path towards greater understanding and compassion.
I can see that. It's about choosing to see the humanity in others, even when they've made mistakes.
And recognizing that we're all capable of making mistakes.
So true. Okay, what's next?
Let's talk about self-deception is our enemy, which I think is a topic we can all relate to on some level.
Oh, for sure. We all have those blind spots, right?
This chapter uses a quote from Diogenes Laertius about Zeno's belief that
Give it to me.
nothing is more hostile to a firm grasp on knowledge than self-deception.
Ouch. That one hits close to home.
It does. And it's so easy to fall into that trap, clinging to our own beliefs even when they might be flawed.
Because it makes us feel good or superior.
Exactly. But the Stoics would say that self-deception is like the ultimate obstacle to growth and wisdom.
So how do we combat that?
They encourage us to cultivate intellectual humility.
What does that mean exactly?
Being open to new information, being willing to change our minds when presented with, evidence that challenges our existing beliefs.
So it's about being willing to admit when we're wrong.
Yep. Let go of that need to be right all the time and embrace the ongoing process of learning and growth.
Right. Because that learning process is essential.
It is. And it requires us to actually value our capacity for reason, which is what the next chapter is all about. Appreciate your ability to reason.
It's about recognizing that our ability to use logic and reason is a gift.
Right? Exactly. And it's a gift that not everyone possesses. We have a responsibility to use it wisely.
We can use our reason to solve problems, to make informed decisions, to understand the world around us.
Right. And it allows us to connect with others, to build meaningful relationships.
It's about recognizing that our capacity for reason is a powerful tool. It can be used for good or for ill.
Absolutely. And we have a duty to cultivate it and use it for the benefit of ourselves and others.
And that leads us to another tricky concept, the beauty of choice, which dives into that Stoic concept of hypolepsis. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that.
Don't worry about it. It basically means that we have a choice in how we perceive and judge things.
So instead of just reacting based on our initial emotions,
we can pause, examine our perceptions, and choose a more constructive response.
I like that.
It's about recognizing that our emotions stem from our own judgments and beliefs about those situations.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Let's say you're feeling overwhelmed by a project at work.
Yeah, I know that feeling all too well.
Right. So instead of getting stressed out, you could choose to reframe the situation. See it as a challenge to overcome.
An opportunity to learn and grow.
Exactly.
It's about shifting our perspective, isn't it?
It really is. And choosing to focus on what we can control, rather than just getting swept away by our emotions.
Which brings us to a chapter that I think speaks to the importance of having strong convictions. Stand your ground.
Oh, this is a great one. It tells the story of President James Garfield.
And his unwavering stance when he faced opposition.
Exactly. He famously said, Of course I deprecate war, but if it is brought to my door, the bringer will find me at home.
That's a powerful statement. So this chapter is about identifying our values and then being willing to stand up for them, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's about speaking our truth, even when it's unpopular.
But what if we're wrong?
That's always a possibility. But the chapter emphasizes the importance of acting with integrity, aligning our actions with our basic understanding of what's true and just.
So it's about being open to learning and growing, adjusting our beliefs as needed, but also having the courage to stand up for what we believe in.
Exactly. And speaking of learning and growing, the next chapter is Living Philosophically.
Okay, I like the sound of that. What's this one about?
It challenges us to see everyday life as an opportunity to practice philosophy.
So philosophy isn't just some abstract thing we read about in books.
Not at all. It's something we embody in our daily choices and interactions.
I love that. It's like bringing those philosophical principles into our relationships, our work, just like every part of our lives.
Exactly.
It's about living with intentionality, with mindfulness, with a commitment to living according to our values.
And I think that leads perfectly into the next chapter. Wealth and freedom are free, which kind of sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, aren't those things usually associated with, having a lot of money?
They are. But this chapter explores how we can achieve wealth and freedom, not through material possessions, but through mastering our desires.
Okay, I'm listening.
It uses a great quote from Epictetus. Freedom isn't secured by filling up on your heart's desire, but by removing your desire.
So it's not about getting everything we want.
It's about wanting what we already have.
But isn't wanting things just part of being human?
Of course, but the chapter encourages us to examine those desires.
Are they truly serving us?
Or are they leading us down a path of, frustration and dissatisfaction?
It's about finding that balance between striving for what's good and being content with what we have.
Exactly, and I think that leads perfectly into the next chapter, the trap of seeking approval.
I think we can all relate to that one.
It explores the dangers of, seeking external validation.
And the importance of developing that inner confidence to just be ourselves.
The chapter uses this analogy of changing ourselves to fit in with a group.
Right, and it highlights how that often leads to inauthenticity and self-betrayal.
It's like we might try to be someone we're not in order to gain acceptance or praise.
But ultimately, it just leaves us feeling empty.
And the irony is those we seek approval from are often flawed themselves.
The chapter encourages us to shift our focus from external approval to internal self-worth.
It's about cultivating that inner confidence that allows you to be true to yourself no matter what others might think.
Which can be incredibly challenging in a world where we're constantly bombarded with messages about how we should look and act and think.
It takes practice, but the Stoics believe that true validation comes from within.
From living in accordance with your values and striving to be the best version of yourself.
And that leads us to reason in all things, which emphasizes prioritizing reason in all of our interactions.
With ourselves, with others, with the world around us.
Marcus Aurelius puts it this way: hurry to your own ruling reason, to the reason of the whole, and to your neighbors.
It's about approaching every situation with a clear mind.
Seeking understanding.
And making decisions that are aligned with wisdom and justice.
Exactly. The chapter encourages us to cultivate our rational minds to engage in thoughtful dialogue.
And to seek solutions that benefit everyone involved.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our actions have consequences that extend beyond ourselves.
It's not about suppressing our emotions or ignoring our intuition.
It's about integrating our rational minds with our emotional intelligence.
Using both to make wise and compassionate choices.
Which brings us to a chapter title that makes me chuckle. Don't let this go to your head.
I think we all know people who could benefit from this advice.
It's a reminder that power can corrupt.
Even those with the best of intentions.
Right. It's like when we achieve success or gain authority, it's easy to let it go to our heads.
And lose sight of our values.
The chapter uses a powerful quote from Marcus Aurelius.
Oh yeah, what's that one?
Make sure you're not made emperor. Avoid that imperial stain. It can happen to you, so keep yourself simple, good, pure, saintly, plain, a friend of justice, God-fearing, gracious, affectionate, and strong for your proper work.
It's called a humility.
It encourages us to use our power for good to make a positive impact on the world.
To prioritize our character over our status.
And speaking of facing challenges, the next chapter, Prepare Yourself for Negativity, offers a strategy for dealing with difficult people
And situation.
It draws on a quote from Marcus Aurelius.
Okay, I'm ready to give it to me.
When you first rise in the morning, tell yourself, I will encounter busybodies, ingrates, egomaniacs, liars, the jealous, and cranks. They are all stricken with these afflictions because they don't know the difference between good and evil.
Well, that's quite a list.
It's like a reality check for anyone who expects the world to be, all sunshine and rainbows.
It's about going into each day with a realistic expectation,
That we might encounter some negativity.
but also with the understanding that those negative behaviors often stem from a place of ignorance.
Or a lack of self-awareness.
So it's about choosing to respond with compassion.
Rather than getting caught up in their drama.
It's not about being a doormat.
Or allowing yourself to be abused.
It's about recognizing that the other person's negativity is their own burden to bear.
And choosing to protect your own peace of mind.
Which seems to lead perfectly into the next chapter, Test Your Impressions.
This one encourages us to question our initial reactions to events.
To distinguish between what is and isn't within our control.
It uses a quote from Epictetus.
I love his quotes. They're always so insightful.
From the very beginning, make it your practice to say to every harsh impression, you are an impression and not at all what you appear to be.
It's like before reacting emotionally, we can pause
Take a step back.
and ask ourselves, is this reaction truly justified?
Or, am I letting my emotions run wild?
It's about recognizing that we have more control over our inner state than we often realize.
And it's not about denying or suppressing our emotions.
It's about acknowledging them, processing them in a healthy way.
And then choosing a response that's aligned with our values.
Which brings us to the next chapter, Question Your Desires. This one seems particularly relevant in today's consumer-driven culture.
It encourages us to examine those things we crave.
Wealth, status, possessions.
And ask ourselves if they'll truly bring us the happiness and fulfillment we seek.
It's so easy to get caught up in the pursuit of more.
And to forget to appreciate what we already have.
The chapter encourages us to get to the root of our desires.
Why do we want these things?
Are they truly serving us?
Or are they based on, external pressures, societal expectations, or a fear of missing out?
It's about choosing desires that are aligned with our values.
And that will truly bring us joy and satisfaction.
Which brings us to another interesting chapter, Embrace Change, which explores the Stoic perspective on the impermanence of life.
And the importance of adapting to new circumstances.
It uses a great anecdote about Epictetus.
He uses a great anecdote about Epictetus when asked about his past philosophical positions.
Oh yeah, what did he say?
He replied, I live from one day to the next. If something strikes me as probable, I say it. And that is how, unlike everyone else, I remain a free agent.
I love that. It speaks to that challenge of letting go of the need to be right all the time.
Especially when we've invested a lot in a particular belief or way of thinking, right?
Absolutely. But this chapter is all about embracing change,
As a natural part of life.
cultivating that intellectual flexibility to adapt to new information and new experiences.
It's not about being fickle or indecisive.
Right. It's about recognizing that our understanding of the world is constantly evolving,
And being open to adjusting our beliefs as we learn and grow.
which leads us to turn it inside out, which
Yeah.
encourages us to look at things from a different angle.
To consider their impermanence.
The chapter quotes Marcus Aurelius, turn it inside out and see what it is like, what it becomes like when old, sick, or prostituting itself, how short-lived the praiser and praised, the one who remembers and the remembered,
It's about gaining a clearer understanding of things.
and detaching from those emotional reactions that might be clouding our judgment.
For example, if you're stressing about a deadline,
Oh, I do that all the time.
you can try zooming out and reminding yourself.
It's just a temporary challenge.
Or if you're feeling envious of someone else's success,
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
remember that fame and fortune are fleeting,
It's about putting things into perspective.
and loosening the grip of those anxieties and attachments.
And speaking of loosening our grip, let's move on to the cost of wrongdoing.
This chapter explores a different kind of letting go.
Letting go of the illusion that we can escape the consequences of our actions,
The Stoics believed that there are natural consequences to our choices,
both internal and external.
even if we avoid external punishment.
We still pay a price internally.
The chapter uses the examples of fugitives living in fear,
Right.
unfaithful partners burdened by guilt.
It's like even if we manage to deceive others, we can't deceive ourselves.
Our conscience always knows.
And ultimately living with integrity and virtue is its own reward.
Bringing that sense of inner peace and fulfillment that comes from knowing we're living in alignment with our values.
Which brings us to a chapter that feels especially challenging in today's world. Love your enemies.
It's definitely a tall order, but the chapter reminds us of Marcus Aurelius's advice.
Oh, which one is this?
He said, the best way to avenge yourself is to not be like that.
It's about choosing a higher path.
One that breaks the cycle of negativity and promotes healing.
But how can we possibly forgive someone who has intentionally hurt us?
It feels almost superhuman. The chapter doesn't necessarily advocate for immediate forgiveness.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing that clinging to anger and resentment harms us more than the person who wronged us.
So it's about choosing to release that burden,
To focus on our own well-being.
rather than letting the other person's actions continue to control our emotions.
Exactly. And forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the behavior or allowing it to continue.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the hurt
Allowing ourselves to feel the emotions.
and then choosing to move forward with compassion.
It's about understanding that everyone makes mistakes.
And choosing a path of healing rather than perpetuating the cycle of pain.
Which brings us to our well-being lies in our actions, which emphasizes that true happiness comes from within.
From our own choices and actions.
The chapter uses this great quote from Marcus Aurelius: "Those obsessed with glory attach their well-being to the regard of others. Those who love pleasure tie it to feelings. But the one with true understanding seeks it only in their own actions."
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose our own happiness.
Regardless of external circumstances.
It's about taking responsibility for our own well-being.
And not relying on external validation or fleeting pleasures to fill that void.
And this leads nicely into Live a Full Life, which encourages us to make the most of each day, regardless of how long or short it might be.
I love that idea. It's about focusing on the quality of our lives.
Not just the quantity of time.
I have a quote from Seneca pulled up here. "There's no need to show Seneca. Show yourself. That no matter how many years you're ultimately given, your life could be clearly and earnestly said to have been a long and full one."
It's a reminder that we have the power to create a fulfilling life regardless of our circumstances.
Exactly.
Are we pursuing our passions?
Are we investing in meaningful relationships?
Are we making choices that align with our values?
It's a call to action, to live with intentionality and purpose,
To savor each moment.
to create a life that feels truly rich and meaningful.
And speaking of creating a life that feels authentic, the next chapter is Stop Caring What People Think.
Something I think many of us struggle with.
Oh, absolutely. It's a big one. The chapter draws on a quote from Marcus Aurelius.
Okay, what did he say?
He said, "I'm constantly amazed by how easily we love ourselves above all others, yet we put more stock in the opinions of others than in our own estimation of self,
It's so true. We often place more value on the opinions of others.
than on our own internal compass."
But how do we break free from that need for approval?
It feels so ingrained.
Especially with social media constantly feeding that comparison game.
The Stoics would say it's about shifting our focus from external validation to internal self-worth.
It's about developing that unshakable confidence that allows us to be true to ourselves.
No matter what others might think.
It's about recognizing that our worthiness comes from within.
Not from the fleeting opinions of others.
And that brings us to find meaningful work, which speaks to that desire to make a difference.
To leave the world a little bit better than we found it.
This chapter quotes Seneca. "It's sad to think that this kind of frustration is an everyday reality for a lot of people. They leave so much of their potential unfulfilled because they have jobs where they don't really do much or because they have too much time on their hands. Worse is when we try to push these feelings away by buying things, going out, fighting, creating drama, indulging in the empty calories of existence, instead of finding the real nourishment."
It's about finding that real nourishment, you
And
know?
that deep sense of purpose.
That comes from engaging in work that matters.
So it's not just about finding a job that pays the bills.
Or looks good on a resume.
It's about finding work that lights us up
That allows us to express our creativity.
and that contributes to the well-being of others.
And it's about recognizing that meaningful work can take many forms.
It might be a traditional career,
A creative pursuit,
volunteer work.
or simply being a loving and present parent or friend.
It's about finding that sweet spot where our passions and our talents intersect with a need in the world.
Which brings us to a chapter that I think a lot of us need to hear. Working hard or hardly working.
It seems to be tackling that whole issue of work-life balance
Right, finding that balance between our drive to achieve.
and our need for rest and rejuvenation.
The chapter uses a quote from Epictetus. "I can't call a person a hard worker just because I hear they read and write, even if working at it all night. Until I know what a person is working for, I can't deem them industrious.
It's not just about putting in the hours,
It's about making sure those hours are spent on things that truly matter.
things that align with our values,
It's about working smart, not just hard.
and finding ways to integrate our work with the other important aspects of our lives.
Our health, our relationships, our passions, our spiritual growth,
It's about finding that balance between striving for success.
and enjoying the journey along the way.
Now, for a really intriguing chapter title, we have but one obligation. What do the Stoics believe is our singular duty in life?
The chapter quotes Marcus Aurelius, who puts it simply, "What is your vocation? To be a good person."
Well, that's pretty straightforward.
It's not about achieving fame or fortune.
Or even happiness.
It's about cultivating our character.
And living a life of virtue
It's about prioritizing our inner world.
over external achievements,
It's a reminder that true success is measured not by what we have.
but by who we are.
And on that note, the near chapter, Problem Solving, suggests that our purpose in life isn't to avoid challenges,
To embrace them.
to see them as opportunities for growth.
That's a real perspective shift.
The chapter encourages us to develop a problem-solving mindset
To approach challenges with curiosity.
rather than fear.
To see setbacks as temporary detours rather than dead ends.
It's about cultivating resilience.
That inner strength that allows us to bounce back from adversity and keep moving forward.
Which brings us to a chapter title that I think sums up a lot of what we've been talking about. This is what we're here for.
I'm both excited and a little bit nervous to hear what this one's about.
It uses a simple but powerful quote from Epictetus.
Hit me with it.
Why then are we offended? Why do we complain? This is what we're here for.
So we're here to face challenges, to learn from them.
To grow and to become more resilient.
Life isn't meant to be easy or comfortable.
It's meant to be a journey of growth, learning, and transformation.
And that journey will inevitably involve challenges, setbacks, and even suffering.
But we can choose how we respond to those challenges.
And we can use them as opportunities to develop our character and become stronger and wiser.
Which brings us to finding the right path, which reminds us that our journey is not always linear.
This chapter uses an analogy that I really like. If a man has lost his way, the important thing is that he find the path again. It doesn't matter whether he returns by the same road or by a different one.
It's about being flexible and adaptable.
Recognizing that life is full of twists and turns.
Sometimes we need to change course.
Adjust our plans.
Embrace new opportunities that present themselves.
It's not about clinging to a rigid plan or expecting things to go exactly as we envisioned.
It's about being open to new possibilities.
And being willing to adjust our sails as needed.
And on that note of finding our way, the next chapter is finding the right mentors.
I think mentorship is so important.
It is. The chapter highlights the importance of learning from others.
Seeking guidance from those who have already navigated the path we're on.
It draws on the wisdom of Seneca, who said, "We like to say that we don't get to choose our parents, that they were given by chance, yet we can truly choose whose children we'd like to be."
We don't have to figure everything out on our own.
We can learn from the wisdom and experience of those who have gone before us.
But what if we don't have access to mentors or teachers in our immediate circle?
We can find mentors in books,
And biographies.
the stories of historical figures.
We can learn from the accumulated wisdom of humanity.
Exactly. And speaking of finding inspiration, the next chapter is Live in Accordance with Nature.
What does that mean exactly?
It's about recognizing that there is a natural order to things.
A set of principles that govern the universe.
By aligning ourselves with those principles.
We can find harmony and peace in our lives.
Yeah.
But how do we know what those principles are? Are we talking about the laws of physics or something more esoteric?
It's about cultivating a sense of awareness, intuition, and connection with the natural world.
It's about observing the patterns of nature.
And recognizing how we fit into those patterns.
It's about finding that balance between our individual will.
And the larger forces at play in the universe.
Which brings us to a chapter that I think a lot of people could benefit from. No shame in needing help.
It reminds us that we're not meant to go through life alone.
We're inherently social creatures.
And our well-being is interconnected.
The chapter uses this great quote from Marcus Aurelius. Don't be ashamed of needing help. You have a duty to fulfill just like a soldier on the wall of battle. So what if you are injured and can't climb up without another soldier's help?
It's a reminder that asking for help is not a sign of weakness.
In fact, it takes courage to admit that we need support.
And to reach out to others.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected.
And we can achieve more when we work together.
Supporting each other through life's challenges.
And speaking of challenges, the next chapter, Offense or Defense, offers a stoic perspective on dealing with the ups and downs of fortune.
It sounds like this chapter is about resilience.
It is. The chapter draws on a quote from Seneca. Fortune doesn't have the long reach we suppose. She can only lay siege to those who hold her tight. So let's step back from her as much as possible.
So it's about recognizing that our attachment to things like wealth, status, and possessions,
Can make us more vulnerable.
to the whims of fortune,
If we define our happiness by those external factors.
we're constantly at the mercy of things that are outside our control.
But true security and stability.
Come from within.
From our own virtue and wisdom.
Which brings us to a chapter that I think is so important in today's world, the power of the present moment.
It emphasizes the importance of focusing on what's happening right now.
Rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
True peace and happiness can only be found in the present moment.
So it's about cultivating mindfulness,
Being present in our bodies and our surroundings.
appreciating the beauty and simplicity of what's right in front of us.
Exactly. And it's not about suppressing thoughts or emotions related to the past or future.
Right.
It's about acknowledging them, allowing ourselves to feel them.
And then gently redirecting our attention back to the present moment.
And that leads us to do your duty.
Which sounds a bit intimidating.
But it's really about finding meaning and purpose in fulfilling our responsibilities.
Even when it's not easy or glamorous.
The chapter uses this quote from Marcus Aurelius. Never shirk the proper dispatch of your duty, no matter if you are freezing or hot, groggy or well-rested, vilified or praised, not even if dying or pressed by other demands.
It's about showing up and doing what needs to be done.
Even when we don't feel like it.
With integrity and a commitment to excellence.
But what if our duties feel meaningless or unfulfilling?
That's a good question. It's true that we might not always find ourselves in ideal circumstances.
But we can still choose to approach our tasks with intention and a sense of purpose.
It's about finding meaning, even in the mundane.
Seeing our efforts as a contribution to something larger than ourselves.
Which leads us to your inner light. This chapter sounds inspiring.
It encourages us to embrace our unique gifts.
And share them with the world.
It uses this lovely analogy of a single flame illuminating a dark room.
Suggesting that we all have something special to offer.
A light that can brighten the world around us.
Even small acts of kindness, compassion, and creativity can make a difference.
And if you're not sure what your unique gifts are,
It's okay.
just keep exploring.
Experiment. Try new things.
Connect with your passions.
Trust that your unique gifts will reveal themselves over time.
And speaking of trusting the process, the next chapter is No One Said It'd Be Easy.
I think we can all relate to that one.
It offers a dose of reality for those of us who expect instant gratification or effortless success.
It uses a quote from Epictetus. Good people will do what they find honorable to do, even if it requires hard work. They'll do it even if it causes them injury. They'll do it even if it will bring danger. Again, they won't do what they find base, even if it brings wealth, pleasure, or power.
Living a virtuous life.
Making a positive impact.
Achieving meaningful goals.
It often requires effort
Discipline.
and even sacrifice.
It's about being willing to put in the work.
To persevere through challenges,
Stay committed to our values.
even when it's difficult or uncomfortable.
And that brings us to Our Duty to Learn, a chapter that encourages us to never stop exploring, growing, and expanding our knowledge.
I love that idea. Learning is a lifelong journey.
It is. The chapter uses this analogy. This is what you should teach me, how to be like Odysseus, how to love my country, wife and father, and how even after suffering shipwreck, I might keep sailing on course to those honorable ends.
I love the image of Odysseus persevering through challenges,
Staying focused on his goals.
even after facing setbacks and storms.
It's a reminder that life is a journey.
And the learning never stops.
Which brings us to the practicality of philosophy, which tackles the misconception that philosophy is just an abstract or theoretical pursuit.
Right. A lot of people think of philosophy as being impractical or irrelevant to everyday life.
But this chapter argues that philosophical principles can be applied to real-world situations.
And can help us make better decisions.
It uses the example of General Herzl Halevi, who found Stoic philosophy to be incredibly valuable.
In his roles as a leader and a warrior.
He said, "People used to tell me that business administration is for the practical life, and philosophy is for the spirit. Through the years, I found it is exactly the opposite. I used philosophy much more practically.
It's a great reminder that philosophy can be a practical guide for living.
A set of tools and principles."
That can help us to live more meaningful, joyful, and resilient lives.
And speaking of tools for personal growth, the next chapter is The Startup of You.
That's a great title.
It is, isn't it? The chapter encourages us to invest in ourselves.
with the same dedication and commitment that we might bring to a business venture.
It draws on this quote from Epictetus. Just as one person delights in improving his farm and another his horse, so I delight in attending to my own improvement day by day.
So it's about approaching our personal growth as an ongoing project,
Setting goals, developing new skills, expanding our knowledge.
constantly seeking ways to improve.
Exactly. And speaking of improvement, the next chapter, Some Simple Rules, offers a concise set of guidelines for living a more fulfilling and virtuous life.
This sounds helpful. What are some of those simple rules?
The chapter uses a quote from Marcus Aurelius. In your actions, don't procrastinate. In your conversations, don't confuse. In your thoughts, don't wander. In your soul, don't be passive or aggressive. In your life, don't be all about business.
It's about bringing our full presence to everything we do,
Communicating clearly and effectively.
being mindful of our thoughts,
Taking ownership of our choices.
and finding fulfillment beyond our professional pursuits,
It's about creating a life that's both meaningful and enjoyable,
one that's aligned with our values.
and allows us to express our full potential.
And that leads us to leading by example, which explores the Stoic view of leadership as a form of service.
This chapter uses one of my favorite quotes from Marcus Aurelius: waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one.
I love that quote. It's so simple, but so powerful.
It's a reminder that true leadership is about action.
Not just words.
It's about embodying the values we admire.
And inspiring others by our example.
And it's not about having a fancy title or position of authority,
We can all be leaders in our own spheres of influence.
whether it's in our families or communities or even our everyday interactions,
It's about setting a good example
making a positive impact.
and inspiring others to be their best selves.
Which brings us to a chapter that seems pretty self-explanatory: do the right thing.
I mean, I think we all know what that means, but this chapter probably goes a bit deeper.
It does. It explores the idea that doing what's right is ultimately in our own best interest.
Even when it's challenging or unpopular.
The chapter uses this great quote that really reframes our perspective on duty and ethics. You don't have to do the right thing, just as you don't have to do your duty. You get to. You want to.
It's like doing the right thing is a privilege.
An active alignment with our values,
It's about recognizing that our choices have consequences.
both for ourselves and for others.
So it's about acting with intention and awareness.
Considering the long-term impact of our choices.
Striving to live a life that's both ethical and fulfilling.
And that brings us to a chapter that challenges our egos. Receive honors and slights exactly the same way.
So it's about not letting praise go to our heads.
Or criticism get us down.
It's about staying grounded and balanced.
The chapter uses a very concise quote from Marcus Aurelius: receive without pride, let go without attachment.
It's about cultivating equanimity,
Maintaining that inner balance.
regardless of external circumstance,
For recognizing that our true worth comes from within.
not from the fleeting opinions of others.
Which brings us to a chapter that I think many of us need to hear. Don't overwork yourself.
Especially in today's always-on culture.
The chapter uses a thought-provoking quote from Seneca. Is it really so pleasant to die in harness?
It's a reminder that life is precious.
We shouldn't sacrifice our well-being for the sake of work or achievement.
It's about finding balance,
Prioritizing our health and well-being.
making time for the things that bring us joy.
It's about remembering to live.
And that leads us to don't go expecting perfection.
Which encourages us to embrace the imperfections of ourselves and others.
The chapter uses this analogy that cucumber is bitter, so toss it out. There are thorns on the path, then keep away. Enough said. Why ponder the existence of nuisance? Such thinking would make you a laughingstock to the true student of nature, just as a carpenter or cobbler would laugh if you pointed out the sawdust and chips on the floors of their shops.
It's about accepting the messy reality of life.
Letting go of unrealistic expectations.
Finding beauty in the imperfections.
It's a reminder that we're all works in progress.
And true beauty often lies in the unique qualities that make each of us special.
Which brings us to find strength in adversity.
This chapter uses the example of Nelson Mandela.
Who endured 27 years of imprisonment.
Yet he never gave up hope.
She said, if they say you must run, insist on walking. If they say you must walk fast, insist on walking slowly. That was the whole point. We are going to set the terms.
His story is a testament to the power of the human spirit,
To find strength and meaning.
even in the face of unimaginable adversity.
It's a reminder that our challenges can make us stronger, more resilient, and more compassionate.
And sometimes the best way to find strength is through silence, which is the focus of the next chapter. Silence is strength.
The chapter quotes Seneca, who said, "Silence is a lesson learned from the many sufferings of life,
It's about recognizing that silence can be a source of power
a way to regain our composure."
and a way to choose our words more carefully
It's not about suppressing our voice.
or avoiding difficult conversations.
It's about choosing to speak with intention and clarity,
Recognizing that sometimes silence can be more powerful than words.
which brings us to principles and pragmatism. This chapter seems to challenge the idea that we have to choose between living by our principles and being practical in the real world,
It does. It uses the example of Abraham Lincoln
who was known for both his strong moral compass.
and his ability to navigate the complexities of politics.
It's a reminder that we can be both idealistic and realistic,
We can hold on to our values.
while also being strategic and effective in our actions,
It's about finding that balance between our principles and our actions
living with integrity.
without sacrificing our effectiveness.
And that brings us to start with where the world is, which encourages us to take action even when circumstances are far from ideal.
The chapter uses a quote from Marcus Aurelius. "Do now what nature demands of you. Get right to it if that's in your power. Don't look around to see if people will know about it. Don't await the perfection of Plato's Republic, but be satisfied with even the smallest step forward and regard the outcome as a small thing."
It's about focusing on what we can control
Taking action in the present moment.
and not letting perfectionism paralyze us.
Even small steps can lead to significant progress
We don't have to wait for everything to be perfect.
before we start moving forward,
And sometimes the most important step we can take is to acknowledge that we're the source of our own problems.
which is the focus of the next chapter. Take charge and end your troubles.
This chapter uses a quote from Marcus Aurelius. "You've endured countless troubles, all from not letting your ruling reason do the work it was made for enough already."
It's a reminder that our thoughts and beliefs have a powerful impact on our experience of life.
We often create our own suffering.
By allowing our emotions to rule our actions,
So it's about recognizing that we have the power to choose our responses
to use our reason to find solutions.
and to draw on our inner strength to overcome adversity.
And that brings us to "This isn't for fun, it's for life."
Okay, that title definitely got my attention.
It uses a quote from Seneca that I think beautifully captures the essence of Stoicism. Philosophy isn't a parlor trick or made for show. It's not concerned with words, but with facts. It's not employed for some pleasure before the day is spent or to relieve the uneasiness of our leisure. It shapes and builds up the soul. It gives order to life, guides action, shows what should and shouldn't be done. It sits at the rudder, steering our course as we vacillate in uncertainties. Without it, no one can live without fear or free from care.
It's about recognizing that philosophy is a practical guide for living,
A way of approaching life with wisdom, courage, and integrity.
and it's a lifelong practice
A journey of self-discovery and growth.
that requires ongoing reflection, learning, and adjustment.
It's about integrating those philosophical principles into our daily choices and actions
And using them to navigate life's complexities.
with greater skill and resilience.
Which brings us to consistency builds character, which explores the idea that true strength of character comes from consistently acting in accordance with our values.
It uses the example of Theodore Roosevelt.
Who was known for his unwavering courage, determination, and commitment to his principles.
It's about recognizing that our character is not something we're born with.
It's something we cultivate through our choices and our actions,
It's not enough to just have good intentions.
or to act virtuously on occasion.
It's about developing those habits of excellence.
Those patterns of behavior that reflect our deepest values,
Exactly. And it takes effort and discipline to cultivate those habits,
to practice them consistently.
to strive for excellence in all areas of our lives.
But what if we struggle with those virtuous behaviors
I mean, we all have our weaknesses.
and our bad habits?
We're all human.
And we're all works in progress
But we have the power to choose our actions,
to shape our character.
to become the best versions of ourselves.
And that brings us to turn weaknesses into strengths.
I like this one.
This chapter challenges us to reframe our limitations.
And to find ways to use them to our advantage.
The chapter uses the example of Muggsy Bogues.
The shortest player in NBA history.
He turned his height into an asset.
He was known for his speed, agility, and ball handling skills.
Instead of letting our perceived weaknesses hold us back,
We can find ways to use them to our advantage.
it's about recognizing that our differences can be our strengths.
And what we perceive as limitations can actually be opportunities for growth and innovation.
Which brings us to The buck stops here.
This chapter emphasizes the power we have to choose our own thoughts and actions.
And to take responsibility for our own lives.
It uses a powerful quote from Epictetus. "For nothing outside my reasoned choice can hinder or harm it. My reasoned choice alone can do this to itself."
Our true freedom lies in our ability to choose how we think and how we act.
Regardless of external circumstances,
So while we can't always control what happens to us,
we can control our response to it.
that's a pretty radical idea.
It is, and it's the foundation of Stoic philosophy. The chapter encourages us to cultivate our inner strength
To take ownership of our choices.
and to recognize that we have the power to create the life we desire.
Speaking of creating the life we desire, the next chapter, Only Fools Rush In, uses the analogy of a wrestler choosing their battles wisely.
It draws on a quote from Epictetus. "A good person is invincible, for they don't rush into contests in which they aren't the strongest."
It's about being strategic
Knowing when to stand our ground.
and when to walk away.
Sometimes the wisest course of action is to simply disengage,
To let go of the need to be right.
to prioritize our own peace of mind.
Which brings us to Find Value in Simplicity, a chapter that encourages us to declutter our lives.
And find contentment in the essentials.
The chapter uses a quote from Seneca. Until we have begun to go without them, we fail to realize how unnecessary many things are. We've been using them not because we needed them, but because we had them.
It's a reminder that we often accumulate things we don't need,
True happiness comes not from material possessions.
but from experiences, relationships, and a sense of inner peace.
It's about creating a life that's more aligned with our values,
One that's free from the clutter and distractions.
that can prevent us from experiencing true joy and fulfillment.
And that brings us to Want Nothing, Have Everything, which explores that Stoic concept of mastering our desires.
As a path to true wealth and freedom.
The chapter uses a quote that I think really gets to the heart of this idea. For what is freedom? To be bothered by nothing.
True freedom doesn't come from getting everything we want,
It comes from releasing the grip of those desires.
especially the ones we can't control.
Exactly. Our attachment to those wants, especially when they're tied to external things, often creates more suffering than satisfaction.
But wanting things is part of being human, right?
Of course, but the Stoics encourage us to